There is a particular kind of loneliness that nobody warns you about. It does not come from having no one around you. It comes from being surrounded by people and still feeling fundamentally unseen. It comes from understanding yourself and other people so deeply that most conversations feel like they are happening on a surface you have long since moved beneath. It comes from wanting connection that goes all the way down, and finding that most people are only available for connection that skims the top. If you have ever felt this, if you have ever sat in a room full of people and felt more alone than you would have felt by yourself, this video is going to explain something about you that you may never have had words for before. The psychology of why self-aware people are often the loneliest is real, it is documented, and it is far more common than anyone talks about honestly. By the end of this video you will understand exactly why your self-awareness, the very quality that makes you who you are, also makes certain kinds of connection harder. And you will know what to do about it. Most people think of self-awareness as a straightforwardly positive quality, the ability to understand your own emotions, motivations, and patterns, to see yourself clearly, to take responsibility for your own role in situations. And it is positive. In many ways, it is one of the most valuable psychological capacities a person can develop. But self-awareness does something to your experience of the world that nobody fully prepares you for. It raises the floor of what you can tolerate. When you understand your own psychological patterns, when you can see the dynamics operating in a relationship, when you can identify the moment a conversation is becoming manipulative or unproductive, you lose the ability to simply not notice. And not noticing, it turns out, is a significant source of social ease for most people. People who do not deeply analyze their interactions can enjoy surface-level connection without feeling the absence of depth. They can participate in small talk without registering it as hollow. They can be part of a group without noticing the dynamics operating beneath the conversation. Self-aware people cannot do this, or can only do it for a limited time before the effort of pretending not to see becomes more exhausting than the loneliness of acknowledging what is missing. The most significant source of loneliness for self-aware people is what might be called the depth gap, the difference between the level of connection they are capable of and the level of connection most people are available for. Self-aware people have done the work of going inward. They have sat with their own discomfort, examined their own patterns, faced their own wounds. This process fundamentally changes what you want from human connection and what you can settle for. Having experienced what genuine depth feels like, having had even one conversation that went all the way down, that covered real territory, that left both people more known than they were before, everything else begins to feel like a lesser version of something. Not because other people are inferior, but because the contrast is now visible in a way it was not before. And the depth gap creates a specific and painful dynamic. The self-aware person can meet most people where they are, can engage at the surface level, can participate in lighter connection, but cannot find genuine nourishment there. It is the psychological equivalent of being able to eat, but only foods that have no nutritional value. The activity of eating is happening. The hunger remains. There is a painful irony at the heart of the self-aware person's loneliness, and it is this. The very depth and complexity that makes them capable of profound connection also makes them significantly harder to know. Most people reveal themselves gradually and relatively simply. Their feelings are accessible, their motivations are fairly straightforward, their inner life, while real and significant, does not have many layers that require sustained excavation to reach. Self-aware people are different. They have layers. Not as a defense mechanism, though sometimes that too, but simply because their inner life is genuinely complex. They have thought carefully about who they are, what they want, what they believe and why. They have examined their own contradictions. They have sat with their own ambiguities rather than resolving them prematurely into simple narratives. This complexity is one of their richest qualities. But it means that knowing them, really knowing them, requires a level of sustained attention, curiosity, and patience that not everyone is able or willing to offer. Many people encounter the first layer of a self-aware person and believe they have arrived at the whole. They have not. And the self-aware person, knowing this, begins to anticipate the incompleteness, to hold back the deeper layers because they have learned, through repeated experience, that most people do not have the capacity to receive them. One of the most draining aspects of being self-aware in a world that generally operates at a lower level of self-reflection is the performance exhaustion, the chronic tiredness that comes from having to modulate your authentic experience to fit the social context you are in. Self-aware people often describe feeling like they are performing a slightly simplified version of themselves in most social situations. Not lying. Not being fake. But editing. Holding back the observation that would make things awkward. Not raising the question that would take the conversation somewhere most people in the room are not prepared to go. Participating in the surface-level exchange when what they actually want to say would require 10 minutes of context that nobody has asked for. This editing is not dishonesty. It is social intelligence, the recognition that not every context is appropriate for depth, that not every person wants to go where you are capable of going. But it is exhausting. And over time it creates a specific kind of depletion, the feeling of having been present in many interactions without having been truly seen in any of them. Of having given energy to connection without receiving the particular kind of connection that actually restores you. Self-aware people often find themselves in relationships where genuine intimacy is perpetually just out of reach, not because the other person does not care, but because there is a fundamental asymmetry in how deeply each person is able or willing to go. This asymmetry is painful in a specific way because it is often invisible to the other person. They believe the relationship is deep because from their vantage point it is one of the deeper connections in their experience. The self-aware person can see both vantage points simultaneously. They can appreciate the genuine care and connection that is present. And they can also feel, clearly, the ceiling, the point beyond which this particular person will not or cannot follow. They can feel themselves adjusting downward to meet the other person in the available space, and the effort of that adjustment, sustained over years, becomes its own source of quiet grief. Not grief that the relationship is wrong, but grief for what it cannot be. And the cruelty of this particular loneliness is that it is often surrounded by people who genuinely love them, which makes it almost impossible to articulate. How do you explain that you are lonely inside a relationship with someone who loves you? That you are unseen by someone who is trying to see you? That the connection is real and yet somehow insufficient in a way that feels almost impossible to name without sounding ungrateful? There is a specific psychological trap that self-aware people fall into that paradoxically deepens their loneliness rather than resolving it. It is the trap of using self-awareness as a substitute for vulnerability. Because here is the thing about deep self-understanding, it can give you such a thorough map of your own inner landscape that you begin to intellectualize your emotional experience rather than actually feeling and sharing it. You understand why you feel lonely. You can trace the origins of the feeling. You can identify the patterns and the triggers. You can explain it articulately and accurately. But explanation is not the same as expression. And sometimes the very sophistication of the self-aware person's understanding becomes a barrier between them and the raw, unprocessed, inarticulate vulnerability that genuine intimacy actually requires. Real connection does not happen at the level of insight. It happens at the level of feeling. And a person who has become so skilled at understanding their feelings that they rarely simply have them without immediately contextualizing, analyzing, and explaining them, can find themselves intellectually intimate with many people while emotionally intimate with almost none. Beyond the loneliness in individual relationships, many deeply self-aware people carry a more pervasive sense of being an outsider, of moving through the world in a way that is somehow slightly out of step with how most people move through it. This outsider feeling has several specific components. There is the experience of seeing dynamics that others do not see, of watching a conversation and being aware of the subtext, the power plays, the unspoken needs operating beneath the surface, while everyone else is simply experiencing the conversation. There is the experience of feeling the weight of things that others seem to move through lightly, of not being able to participate in the casual dismissal of complexity that makes certain social environments feel effortless for less reflective people. There is the experience of caring about things, depth, authenticity, genuine understanding that the mainstream social environment does not particularly reward or even recognize. And there is the particular exhaustion of knowing that explaining this outsider experience to most people will either not land or will sound like arrogance, as though you are claiming to be better than others rather than simply describing a genuinely different experience of being in the world. You are not claiming superiority. You are describing isolation. But the risk of being misunderstood in the explanation is real enough that many self-aware people simply stop trying to explain it and carry the outsider feeling silently, which deepens the loneliness further. One of the most important realizations that self-aware people eventually reach, and one that genuinely begins to shift the loneliness, is that the goal of social connection needs to change from quantity to quality in a way that is more radical than most people are willing to go. For most people, a reasonable social life means a reasonable number of relationships of varying depth, some close, some casual, some somewhere in between. For deeply self-aware people, this model often does not work. A large number of relationships at the surface level does not add up to the nourishment that even one genuinely deep relationship provides. The mathematics of connection are different. And accepting this, truly accepting that you are someone who needs depth over breadth, who would rather have one conversation that goes all the way down than 10 that skim the surface, is both liberating and frightening. Liberating because it stops you from measuring your social worth by the number of your connections. Frightening because it means accepting that the kind of connection you need is rarer than you would like, and that finding it requires a willingness to be selective, patient, and honest about what you actually need rather than settling for what is most readily available. The most practically important question for self-aware people experiencing loneliness is not how to need less depth, that is not possible and not desirable, but how to find the people who are capable of meeting them where they actually are. And the first thing to understand about finding those people is that they are rarer than average, but they are not as rare as the loneliness sometimes makes them feel. They exist in specific places, in communities built around shared intellectual or creative or psychological interest, in environments where reflection is valued rather than seen as excessive, in the spaces where people go specifically to go deeper. They are often in therapy or have been. They are often readers, creators, people who process their experience through some form of making or reflection. They often feel the same loneliness you feel, which means they are as hungry for genuine connection as you are, and when two people like this find each other, the depth of connection that becomes possible is unlike anything available at the surface level. The second thing to understand is that finding these people requires a willingness to be the one who goes first, to offer the depth before you know whether it will be received, to take the risk of being more real than the situation seems to call for, to trust that the people who are capable of meeting you will recognize the invitation and respond to it. That vulnerability, going first, going deeper before you are sure it is safe, is the price of the connection you are looking for. And for most self-aware people, it is worth it. There is a version of this loneliness that can be made peace with, not by eliminating it, but by changing your relationship to it. And that shift begins with understanding that the loneliness is not evidence of something wrong with you. It is not proof that you are too much, too complicated, too intense for other people. It is the natural consequence of a depth of inner life that most social environments are not designed to accommodate. Making peace with the loneliness means acknowledging it honestly rather than performing contentment you do not feel. It means understanding that some periods of genuine solitude, not social isolation but chosen aloneness, are not failures of connection but necessary conditions for someone whose inner life is as active and complex as yours. It means building a relationship with yourself that is rich enough to sustain you through the periods when the right external connections are not available. It means finding the places where your depth is a gift rather than an inconvenience, the conversations, the creative work, the intellectual engagement, the spiritual practice, where what you are capable of is exactly what is called for rather than too much for the room. And it means holding on to the knowledge that the loneliness, however real, is not permanent. That the people who can meet you at depth exist. That you have already had glimpses of the connection that is possible. And that each of those glimpses is not a taunt but a promise, evidence of what becomes available when the right people find each other. You are not too much. You are not broken because depth does not come easily in most social environments. You are not failing at connection because surface-level interaction does not nourish you the way it seems to nourish others. You are someone with a rich and complex inner life who has not yet found enough of the people capable of receiving it. And that is a circumstance, not a life sentence. The loneliness of self-awareness is real. But so is the connection that becomes possible between people who share it. And when you find those people, when you are finally in a conversation that goes all the way down, with someone who does not flinch at the depth, who meets you where you actually are rather than where it is comfortable for them, you will understand exactly why it was worth waiting for. If this video helped you feel less alone in your loneliness, subscribe right now. Every single week we go this deep into the psychology of what makes us human. The things most people feel but nobody explains honestly. Nobody else is going this deep and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you recognize this loneliness? Describe what it feels like for you. I read every single comment and your words might be exactly what someone else needs today to feel less alone in something they have never been able to name. And next week, we are going somewhere that will challenge everything you think you know about yourself. The psychology of why the version of yourself you show the world is almost never your real self and the hidden cost of the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be. That video is going to be one of our most important yet. You do not want to miss it. See you there.